In Chris Philp now. The argument, therefore, is that not only is it unpopular austerity and the public won't wear it, but also economically it isn't working.
Well, look, I think you've got to remember where we came from. I mean, 7 years ago, we had a deficit that was 11% of GDP, £150 billion a year. That was completely unsustainable. And if we'd carried on at that level, the country would now be bankrupt. Even today, we're spending £46 billion a year servicing our debt, despite the fact at the close of business last night, the government was only paying 1.03% for 10-year gilts. If we were paying the same as the Italians, 1.94, that interest bill would be closer to £100 billion. If we paid the same as Portugal, 2.83%, that interest bill would be £150 billion.
So when Philip Hammond says that voters are weary of the long slog, is he just acting as a commentator, just saying, look, it's tough, while saying, actually, we're just going to carry on as we always have?
Well, it has been tough, no question about that, but it's also been necessary because there's nothing noble or moral about spending more than you can afford and sending the bill to your children.
To be clear, therefore, no change.
Well, hang on. I think what's happened in the last 7 years has been necessary. It's also, by the way, worked. We've created 2.8 million new jobs, 75% of them full-time. On that Grenfell Tower point that Paul Mason mentioned a moment ago, I mean, that building had received an £8.9 million refit. The issue wasn't the money. The issue was that the design was fatally flawed. And it appears that a relatively small amount of money, $5,000 for the cladding or $200,000 for sprinklers, would have made that building safe. So it wasn't a question of money, it was a question of fatal design flaws, and I do hope that whoever is responsible is held fully to account.
Time rather limited. You are going to have to make a quite intellectually tricky argument, Paul, aren't you, which hasn't so far succeeded with the electorate, which is you can spend more in order to borrow less. And it's a puzzler for people.
No, they kind of get it because, if you go to university, you expect you spend some money to go to university, you end up with a higher wage. Everyone understands that if you invest in something, you can get a reward from it. But the real difference is, there's nothing hardwired into conservatism that says it has to shrink the state, that says it has to destroy public services. We saw in the 1970s Anthony Barber, Conservative Chancellor, in the 80s Nigel Lawson.
The Barber boom.
The Barber boom, the Lawson boom. This was fiscal stimulus and it was monetary stimulus. And I would say to you, Chris, that unless the Conservative Party can break its addiction to austerity, it's actually going to break itself.
Chris Philp?
Well, look, I mean, booms are normally followed by busts, and nobody wants to damage or break public services. What we do need to do is make sure we're not spending more than we can afford and sending the bill to our children. But we need to make sure we do defend public services. I support the fact that spending on the NHS is going up. There are some areas where I think the government does need to look again in the coming 2 or 3 years. I mean, spending on schools is one area.
Well, will it, though?
Yeah, 10 seconds each is what people want to know is, look, we could have had this debate last year, the year before. Something has changed. There were votes, Chris Philp, for policies that were previously regarded as financially reckless. Corbyn got. So the question is, does anything change? Or, if you're someone who agrees with Paul Mason, you just have to wait for a new government, very briefly, if you want.
Well, look, we do need to be financially responsible, but the only way we can have the money to spend on the NHS and schools is by having a strong economy that produces money, and we're going to make sure we keep doing that.
Brief last one.
Hammond's signalling no change today, and I think that puts them on the road to ruin because you absolutely need resilience in public services, and they're falling apart.
Chris Philp and Paul Mason, he was giving you free advice as a political strategist there as well. Chris, thank you for joining us.